Welcome back to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Maura Johnson. For today's episode, I spoke with Fran Quigley, a clinical professor of law at the Indiana University McKinney School of Law in Indianapolis. Professor Quigley is the director of McKinney's Housing, Health, and Human Rights Clinic, which engages students in domestic human rights advocacy and litigation with a focus on the human right to safe and affordable housing. In addition to this teaching, Professor Quigley is the author of several academic journal articles and books on human rights, including his most recent book, Lessons from Eviction Court. He shares with me the biggest challenges facing the eviction crisis in the United States, what reform is needed to address those challenges, and how the Human Rights Clinic is working to make affordable housing more accessible to Hoosiers. But before we get into the episode, here is a word from our sponsor, Taft.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
Professor Quigley, thank you for joining me.
Maura, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your work with the Housing, Health, and Human Rights Clinic at McKinney?
Sure. So I do teach. I'm on faculty at IU McKinney School of Law here in Indianapolis, and my main duties here are to teach a clinic called the Housing, Health, and Human Rights Clinic. And what it is, students who are in the back half of their law school career take on their first clients, and they represent clients as certified legal interns under my supervision and sometimes other adjunct professors' supervisions. And the work we do these days is almost solely on housing. A whole lot of it is representing folks who are facing eviction, and we go to local eviction courts and advocate for them and help them in that really difficult process.
Can you delve more into how the students kind of work within the clinic, since I know this is a student clinic?
Yeah. The students are all in a status where it's called certified legal interns, and some of your listeners may be aware of that. But if a student is halfway through their law school career and if they've taken professional responsibility courses, then they are allowed to be certified legal intern, which lets them practice law essentially as long as they're supervised by a licensed attorney and closely supervised. And students start off the semester, oftentimes they've never talked to a client before, oftentimes they've not been to court before. They almost always have never spoken in court before or advocated for a client or negotiated with an opposing lawyer. So we do a lot of classroom work. We do training sessions, but then the bulk of it is that they do represent clients directly. And these are clients in our clinic. They're almost always folks who are facing eviction and folks who are dealing with poor housing conditions. And they're all low-income folks. And so we partner with Indiana Legal Services in that. All of our clients are independent.
And are the clients primarily in the central Indiana area, or do you represent statewide?
Mostly just for geography reasons, and students have other classes, et cetera. We do focus on really Marion County for the most part. For the last few years, the core of our work has been to go out to one or two particular courts every week and physically be a presence there, and oftentimes meeting people who we've not met before. We don't know anything about their case when they show up for their eviction day, because these are low-income folks. They don't have lawyers. And so we provide, sometimes it's just brief assistance, and sometimes it ends up being a more lengthy, involved case. I mean, one of the key places that we do this is Warren Township on the far east side of it, in front of Judge Garland Graves. And we will go and on a particular day of the week have a presence there. And if folks want to talk to a lawyer or a law student, they do. And again, sometimes it's just some quick advice, but sometimes it becomes a very involved case. But in every case, the person is in crisis. They're there the day they're supposed to lose their home. They've fallen behind on their rent because of a financial crisis or because the conditions in the home have been really poor.
Yeah. I can imagine as a lawyer or a law student, that's a difficult, emotional part of the job that's difficult to navigate. How do you work through that? And also, how do you teach students how to handle that?
Yeah, it's really a great question, Maura, because the students and I we work through that together. Because I got to say, I've been doing this for a minute, but it's still hard for me. It's emotionally difficult to be on this journey with folks when they struggle. And frankly, oftentimes we can't fix the problem. They just are simply can't afford their rent and they're in a position where they're getting ready to lose their home. And sometimes they're going to become homeless. And we try to work through that in the clinic. It's still, frankly, every semester is different and a work in progress, but we do try to acknowledge from the beginning, this is emotionally difficult work. We have students, of course, that come from all kinds of backgrounds. Some of them come from they themselves and their families have had housing insecurity. They faced eviction and homelessness before. Some have never seen anything like this. So the students who have been through it can help in the classroom setting and in the courtroom setting about how to work with people and how to accompany them on the journey. Where the gold standard oftentimes is students who are getting social work degrees or getting MSWs as well as their JDs. Those students are terrific at this because they've been trained in a way that lawyers sometimes aren't. But it really is a pretty good training session for lawyers because folks don't come to us oftentimes in the good times, right? They come to us when there's a crisis, and maybe it's going to be in the student's future practice of family law crisis or criminal law crisis and not just an eviction. But either way, whatever happens, they're probably going to be dealing with folks at a really stressful time of their lives and how we respond to it. So we do have training sessions in class about that. But that's an ongoing challenge, and to be honest, one that I still struggle with myself because it can be very stressful.
And from beginning to end of a client's case, how long would you say students typically spend with a client throughout their case?
Yeah. One of the aspects, or a really core aspect of evictions that make it so hard for tenants in Indiana, is that the cases move so fast. And sometimes the day that we meet the client, frankly, oftentimes the day we meet their client is the day they're going to get a court order about when they need to move, or optimistically, the case gets dismissed. But that actually, that speed provides a real opportunity in the education context because it does allow the students to see a case from beginning to end. If it's a tort case, if it's a complicated contract case, or even a family law or criminal law case, usually in the midst of a 13-week semester, a student can't see the case from beginning to end. The eviction cases almost always end within a few weeks. And so sometimes the relationship with the client is literally just for an hour or two in court trying to solve the problem. And sometimes it lasts for a few weeks or even a month or two. But really, the latter is pretty rare. Usually these are cases that move very quickly, and the student will have a very high intensity experience with the client.
And beyond the courtroom and representing a client, is there anything that the clinic does maybe after the case is through and their next steps?
Yeah, we work really closely with Indiana Legal Services, and Indiana Legal Services has a housing social worker on staff who does terrific work. And we do try to work with her, and the students have advocate for the clients finding new housing, getting assistance from the township trustees or other resources. And so we do try to be holistic in what we do, but at the end of the day, we're lawyers and law students who are training to be lawyers. And so that's where we give our best contribution. But we do also, the experience more of being in court and seeing these struggles every day gives us a really informed view of what the policy problems are, about how people are eligible for subsidized housing, but we don't have anywhere near enough of it, about how these eviction cases move way too fast in our view, especially compared to other legal cases that can usually take months and months, if not years, to resolve, while an eviction case can be done in days. And so that view from eviction court gives us the opportunity to be advocates for and to inform the community about some of the policy issues and frankly, how we can end this so that we don't have a situation where we've got overflowing eviction courts and overflowing homeless shelters, and that we can do better. And our experience in court gives us the window into how we can fix this.
And that's a great segue into talking about your book. Can you just give me a summary about what it's about and the motivation behind writing this all down, your experience?
Sure. Sometimes books are titled the right way and sometimes they're not. I think this one have the appropriate title because it's called Lessons from Eviction Court, How We Fix Our Housing Crisis. And it really is taking the lessons that we learn mostly from our clients about how they struggle and why they can't afford their housing and why they're in eviction court. And then using those client stories. I don't use their names in the book. I use pseudonyms, but they're real stories and real clients in our community and how they struggle, and using that to illustrate how we can fix the problem. And it comes out of this is the conversations that we've had in our classrooms for years. We talk about the clients, and that leads to, we have a client who has a mom with 3 young kids, and one of the kids got sick and car broke down and they fell behind on their rent. The cliche that we're all half the country is one paycheck away from being homeless. We see that cliche is really true in eviction court because people just fall a little bit behind and the walls come tumbling down. So what's the answer for her? The answer is she's eligible for subsidized housing, but we have a situation in the United States where 3 out of every 4 households who are eligible for subsidized housing don't get it because we don't fund it enough. If you're eligible for food stamps, you're eligible for Medicaid, you receive it. It's called an entitlement, but housing isn't. And we can change that. Other nations have do it much differently and much better. We used to do it much better in the United States a generation or two ago. So the client's own challenges that we see are the point us in the direction of the policies that we think can and should be changed.
And alongside the lack of subsidized housing, what would you say are the biggest issues facing the eviction crisis, not only in the United States, but in Indiana?
Yeah, I do think that's the big one. I think that most people come to eviction court because they simply can't afford market rate rent. They are living with a disability and therefore they have very limited income, or they've got kids, or somebody's been sick, or a car's broken down. And so their paychecks have not been what they would like them to be. And as a result, they just can't afford market rate rent of $1,000, $1,100, $1,200 and more if you've got several kids. And so subsidized housing is, we think, the end game. But in the meantime, on the path to that, Indiana is really an interesting example because we have really high eviction rates. By some measure, some of the highest eviction rates in the country, which if you think about it, doesn't make a lot of sense because housing is difficult for our clients to afford, but housing is cheaper in Indiana than it is in the coast or in big cities. So why do we have higher eviction rates? And I think, unfortunately, that turns the attention back to our court system, to our legal system, because we make evictions in Indiana. We use the term fast, cheap, and easy. We make it very easy for a landlord to file a case and to get an eviction order. Sometimes within days, family gets put out. The case is over. It's cheap to do that. It only costs $100 or so to file the case. Oftentimes, the landlords will have to hire attorneys to do this work, but the attorneys do huge volumes of the work because the tenants on the other side almost never have a lawyer. So it's a pretty easy process. And in Indiana, we don't have a clear statutory authority for tenants to withhold rent if the conditions have been bad. So we have made our court system into an eviction mill. And again, that's a choice by our judiciary. It's a choice by our legislature. And as a result, we've got these really high eviction rates. In Indianapolis, where we are, there's 500 new eviction filings every single week, just in one county of the state, just huge numbers. And there's 10 different courts that are operating multiple eviction dockets each week, just in one county. We do so much of that. And those of your listeners who are lawyers would recognize that nothing else in the legal system acts that. A criminal case takes months to resolve. A contract case takes months, if not years, to resolve. A tort case takes months, if not years. Same with family law. But in an eviction case, we provide this really dramatic remedy of kicking a family out of their home. And we do it within days. And we do it almost solely with the tenants not having any legal counsel. So they simply put up no real significant defense to this happening. So we've got to look back on, for those of us who are lawyers, those of us involved in the court system, and our role. And it's because our court system does make it much, much easier for folks to lose their home much more quickly.
One topic that I've seen discussed and actually written a story about it regarding the eviction conversation is just how damaging sometimes the eviction records can be for tenants looking to secure new housing. So can you talk about that a little bit more and just, I guess, the accessibility of seeing those records?
Yeah. I got to say, when we talk to folks in eviction court, we're there on the day that they may be losing their homes. And they are almost all top priority is to how to stay in their homes or how to get to the next place they're going to live. The second priority, and sometimes even the number one priority, is how do I keep this eviction off my record? Because people are very aware that if they have an eviction that shows up on my case or shows up in a landlord database, it's going to be much harder for them to get the next place that they're going to. And they see it all the time. They tangibly will show you, here, I got turned down for this rental place. I got turned down for that rental place because I had an eviction on my record. So we call it actually a scarlet E of an eviction on your record. And that's actually an area where Indiana, we've made a lot of progress. We've had 2 different pieces of legislation passed in the recent years to make it easier for evictions to be sealed. It's still not a slam dunk, especially if somebody's been evicted and owes some back rent. but a lot of people can get their eviction sealed. A lot of people have gotten their eviction sealed or expunged. Sometimes we use that term, just like in the criminal context, where it is not visible for future landlords to see that they've had the eviction on their record. So it's a huge priority. There's Indiana Legal Services and in neighborhood legal, Christian Legal Clinic, and other folks will do eviction sealing clinics throughout. And in Justice Project, will do eviction sealing project clinics around the community. And people line up because they know that it's really damaging to them to have that on the record. So that's one thing that sometimes, again, that's our advocacy too, is if we can figure out a way for the case to get dismissed or to get sealed at the time, then folks may have to move, but at least they're not going to have that on their record. So it's one of the ways that lawyers can and law students can really help at the time of crisis.
And how have you been able to, and maybe students in the clinic, been able to advocate for policy change in Indiana?
What we have is we're in an academic setting. And so students are researchers and writers, and I do some of that in the professor role as well. So a lot of what we've done more has been on the writing of reports and raising awareness. We did a pretty big report this past year in collaboration with a lot of community groups, but students did the lion's share of this work about our township trustee system, which I know IBJ has written about as well. The township trustee system is designed to provide assistance for poor people. It's actually a 150-year-old system. It's been around a really long time, and it's provide local assistance. Some township trustees do a good job of that, and some township trustees, frankly, do not. And with our clients who are losing their homes because they can't afford a particular month's rent, township trustee assistance at the right time can be the difference between a family staying in the school district and safely housed or sleeping in the backseat of their car, and the kids being displaced from school and all the negative mental and physical health implications of an eviction. That's one of the things, again, the vantage point of seeing the struggle individually and seeing people struggle in many parts of our community to try to get assistance from the township trustee, let us do the research and find the data and to report on, again, with collaboration with community partners, what some of the problems have been. Same thing when it comes to the eviction process. We talked about a fast, cheap, and easy. We've written about that some. We're going to do some more of that in terms of trying to advocate for courts to adopt different rules, our legislature to adopt the right for people, if they have really poor housing conditions, to put their rent into escrow rather than to pay it to the landlord. And so all those types of things, again, we can do the research and we do the writing, we do the studies, and there's a lot of good in that, but it really is much more informed and factual and powerful if we can say we've seen this every week when we stand by these folks who are losing their home.
I would say that the book does a good job of showing that right there.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. It's, again, a kind of rough privilege, but we do see the data are not abstract when you're in court and you see the mom with a baby on her hip and they don't know where they're going to stay in 2 nights. And you see the person who's living in a wheelchair and they're getting pushed out of their home and they're going to end up on the streets or a shelter. And that just takes all the kind of abstract policy concerns and makes it very real. So thank you. That's the point of the book, right? Is to try to use those stories to illustrate what's the problem and how we can fix it.
And would you say, I guess, looking at the numbers in Indiana specifically, would you say that Marion County is the county with the biggest issue in eviction? Just the sheer number?
Yeah, the sheer number, just by population, we would probably be anyway. But to be honest, yeah, I do think eviction numbers are a little bit hard to track nationally and even statewide. Some folks are doing some work trying to get that savvy at Indianapolis, and other folks are trying to narrow down. But yeah, Marion County, just the sheer volume and frankly, the fact that we do have a lot of folks who struggle to afford their rent. But I have to say, Maura, I don't know how bad it is other places, because outside of Marion County, where we do have the tenant advocacy program, where we and Indiana Legal Services and other agencies do try to provide some bit of help to folks at the day of their eviction, people outside of Marion County are going to court on their own. And they are just losing their homes and nobody's knowing about it. No one's seeing it. It's just private pain. And Professor Judy Fox, who's a professor emeritus at Notre Dame, and other researchers have chronicled this in St. Joe County and other places. But evictions are happening really quickly. And frankly, folks without lawyers, and the landlords almost always do have a lawyer, they're really struggling in court. And I think the problem is, the problem is definitely acute statewide. To be honest, I don't think we know how bad it is other places. Marion County, we see it, but we are there.
Yeah. And would you say, I think at the lawyer, we're always talking about the attorney shortage. Would you say that there is especially a shortage of lawyers that are able to represent clients in eviction cases across the state?
Oh, absolutely. Again, I mentioned we partner with Indiana Legal Services, so they're statewide and they're the largest civil legal aid organization, and they just get so many more requests for assistance than they can possibly help with. And that's always a challenge when we talk about the attorney shortage, because we're attorneys, we've got rent to pay and food to put on the table too. So we've got to figure out the way for the attorneys to get paid. And someone getting evicted almost never, ever has any money to pay a lawyer, right? So sometimes we do get, on occasion, people saying, oh, I want to know somebody in private practice who represents tenants. And that just doesn't exist, because that's not an area of private practice where somebody can make a living, because these are folks who are all struggling financially. If they had money, they'd pay their rent. So yeah, there's a huge gap. And again, folks, it's an enormously important legal issue where they're going into court in Fountain County or in Warren County or what have you. And they're going into court on their own. They don't understand the process, and there is no lawyer there to help them. And yeah, it'd be wonderful to have, right to counsel. To counsel in landlord-tenant cases and eviction cases does exist in several communities around the country. That would be a wonderful thing to have, essentially a public defender type model, recognizing that somebody losing their homes is really a consequential legal event, and some folks need and deserve a lawyer at either side.
What, I guess, are the most clear next steps in this crisis?
I think in Indiana, I think the one thing that we can do at the state level and in the courts, frankly, and the judges have a big role in this, is to just slow down the eviction process. Some people will say, oh, they're going to lose their home anyway. They can't afford the rent anyway. But if we slow down the eviction process, make it slower the way other court cases are, that gives people time to catch up on their rent, pay their landlord. It gives a chance, if they can't catch up on the rent, to find another place to be. And so they're not going to end up on the streets. It gives a chance for, frankly, the process to work in a way that we would like it to as lawyers and judges in the legal community. Because I think it's an embarrassment, to be honest. And I've heard that from many lawyers and many judges, of embarrassment that our legal system really does rubber stamp evictions, and by the thousands every month across the state, with folks not having access to a lawyer and not having a more slow and deliberate legal process. So we can do that. The next step, I think, really is to look at the fact that people who can't afford market rate rent are eligible for housing assistance, and let's make them eligible for housing assistance. It's not a radical idea that's been proposed in Congress, proposed by presidential candidates, et cetera, to essentially have universal housing assistance. If get almost every one of the clients we see getting evicted are eligible for housing assistance, and just can't get it because we don't fund it enough. And if we allow those folks to have vouchers or access to good, safe public housing, then we would clear out these eviction courts. There'd be very little happening there. And frankly, we clear out the homeless shelters. And so it's a very fixable problem. Now, it's going to take some resources to do it. But as I mentioned in the book, we spend a lot of money, government money, on housing. Now we just spend it for the most part on lots and lots of subsidies for corporate landlords, and frankly, a lot of subsidies for wealthy homeowners, even folks who own multiple homes. We give a whole lot of housing subsidies to those folks. If we switch that, even just part of that, and started subsidizing the need for low-income folks, we can end that. But right now, the famous quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is that too often we have socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor. And in housing, that's very true. We have lots and lots of housing subsidies for the wealthy and for big corporations, and not nearly enough for the clients we see in eviction court. It's really fixable. This is a horrible crisis. With the eviction courts, if folks ever go, there's court watcher programs in central Indiana. There's some being created in other places where lay people can go and actually watch court, and lawyers who've seen it or judges who've seen it know that it's heartbreaking. And it's happening in these huge numbers. And we see the effects of it, because eviction is a prequel to homelessness. We see it on the streets and we see it in shelters. But it doesn't have to be this way. It wasn't that way in the United States a generation or two ago. It's not that way in other nations. We can fix this if we want to.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Quigley. I appreciate you joining me.
Thanks, Maura. I appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Thank you for listening to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast. For more legal news, you can check us out online at theindianalawyer.com, and you can follow us on social media.